Let's be honest. When you hear the word constitution, what comes to mind? Probably some dusty old book, right? Locked away in an archive somewhere? Well, the Indian constitution, it's a whole different story. It's not just some static rule book. It's this dynamic, living blueprint for the biggest democracy on the planet. And the story of how it was created, wow, it's just as incredible as the document itself. Okay, so just to give you a sense of the scale we're talking about, it's over 145,000 words long. That makes it by far the longest written constitution of any country in the world. I mean, it's not just long, it's incredibly detailed, which you got to ask, right? Why? Why so long? And yeah, that incredible length, it was totally on purpose. It wasn't an accident. If you look at other democracies like the UK with its unwritten constitution or the US with its super concise one, India's founders went a completely different way. See, they weren't just writing down a few basic rules. They were trying to do something monumental. Weave together this incredibly diverse nation. We're talking countless languages, religions, cultures, you name it. So every single one of those details, it's like a stitch in this giant complex tapestry. The detail isn't just a feature, the detail is the design. So, okay, how did this masterpiece even get made? Well, to get that, we need to rewind the clock a bit, back to this huge pivotal moment in history. A brand new, independent India was facing this almost unimaginable challenge, figuring out what its future was going to look like. And this whole journey, it's happening while history is just unfolding at a breakneck pace. The foundation was kind of laid with the Colonial Era Act back in 35. Then, in 1946, the Constituent Assembly gets formed. But just think about the pressure here. A year later, in 47, India gains independence, but at the same time, it's going through the trauma of partition. So while they're literally debating the idea of what India is, the country itself is being born. For almost 3 years, they argued, they debated, they compromised, and finally, in November 49, they adopted the Constitution. And when it came into full force on January 26, 1950, that wasn't just day one of a new rulebook. No, that was the birth of the Republic of India. And you know, this quote from Nehru, it just nails the spirit of what they were trying to do. It wasn't just, let's make some laws. It was a proclamation. It was them standing up and telling the entire world, India is now an independent, sovereign republic. And this document, this is our guide. The sheer ambition of it all, it's just immense. Now, a vision that huge, you need some seriously brilliant minds to pull it off, right? These were the core architects. You had Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the absolute powerhouse chairman of the drafting committee, whose legal genius really sculpted the final text. Working with him was Prime Minister Nehru, who brought that grand philosophical vision. Then there was Dr. Rajendra Prasad, who had the tough job of president, steering all those intense debates. And you can't forget Sardar Patel, the ultimate pragmatist who did the Herculean task of bringing hundreds of princely states into the fold. These weren't just politicians. They were nation builders. They literally turned an idea into a country. Okay, so the mission was set, the dream team was assembled, but what about the actual blueprint? What did they put in it? Well, the features they picked weren't just pulled out of a hat. Every single one was a carefully crafted solution for India's very unique, very specific challenges. And you know what's so brilliant? They were super pragmatic about it. They didn't feel the need to reinvent the wheel. Instead, they basically went shopping for the best constitutional ideas from all over the world. It's often called a bag of borrowings, which is just perfect. They grabbed ideas like fundamental rights and judicial review from the US, a parliamentary system from the UK, and these things called directive principles from Ireland. But, and this is the key part, it was never a simple copy and paste job. Oh no. They took each idea, put it under the microscope, and carefully adapted it, reshaped it, to make sure it would work for India. And one of the absolute genius adaptations is this idea of a quasi-federal system. Sounds complicated, but it's really a clever balancing act. See, it's not purely federal like the US, where states have a ton of power, and it's not purely unitary like the UK, where the central government has all the power. It's somewhere in the middle. It creates what's called a union of states. This gives the central government enough strength to keep the country united, which was a huge concern, but it also gives the states enough freedom to govern their own incredibly diverse populations. It's a design literally made for unity and diversity. All right, now we get to the real heart of the promise the Constitution makes to its people, the fundamental rights. These are the big ones, the essential freedoms like equality, liberty, and justice that are guaranteed to every single citizen. But here's the absolute game changer. They're justiciable. And that's not just some fancy legal word. It's your shield. It means that if the government ever steps on these rights, you have the power to take them to court and win. So working alongside those rights, you got the directive principles. The best way to think about these, they're like the nation's conscience. Or maybe its long-term to-do list. These are all the social and economic goals, things like making sure people have a decent wage or protecting the environment that the government should always be aiming for. They basically set the moral compass for the country. So you see how these two work together? It's a really powerful system. On one hand, you have fundamental rights. Those are your legally enforceable promises, the things you can demand. On the other hand, you have the directive principles. Those are the guiding instructions for the government. So one is like a legal hammer you can actually use in a courtroom, and the other is the nation's moral compass, always pointing the way forward. It's this incredible balance between what's guaranteed for the individual and what's good for everyone. So, if all those features we just talked about are the architecture, the beams and pillars of the Constitution, then the preamble, well, the preamble is its soul. It's the mission statement. It's the why behind everything else. It's the entire philosophical heart of the document, distilled down into one single powerful paragraph. And how does it start? With three of the most powerful words ever written into a national document. We, the people. Just think about that. This isn't a set of rules handed down from a king or some colonial power. Right from the very first line, it establishes that the ultimate authority, the very source of this Constitution's power, comes from one place and one place only, the people of India themselves. From there, the preamble lays out these 5 massive promises that basically define the character of the nation. What is India going to be? Well, it's going to be sovereign, completely independent, socialist, committed to justice for everyone, secular, respecting all religions equally, democratic, run by the will of the people, and a republic, meaning the head of state is elected, not born into it. And Dr. Ambedkar put it so perfectly when he talked about the philosophy behind all this. He said that liberty, equality, and fraternity, they're not just a random list of nice words. They're an inseparable trinity. You can't have one without the others. Think about it. You can't have real liberty if people aren't equal. And you can't have either of those things if there isn't a sense of fraternity, a feeling of brotherhood and sisterhood holding the whole nation together. But here's where the real genius of the architects kicks in. They knew they weren't fortune tellers. They had no idea what India would look like in 50 or 75 or 100 years. So what do? They designed this blueprint to be able to change, to evolve with the country. It was never, ever meant to be a dusty museum piece. It was designed from day one to be a living, breathing guide for a nation on the move. And how do we know it's alive? Well, the proof is right there in the numbers. It's been amended over 100 times. This built-in flexibility is what's allowed it to adapt to new social challenges, to new technology, to the changing dreams of its people. It's what keeps it relevant, instead of becoming just a historical relic. But wait, this flexibility isn't a free-for-all. There's a really important safety net, a safeguard put in place by the Supreme Court called the Basic Structure Doctrine. Honestly, you can think of it as the Constitution's immune system. What it says is, yes, Parliament can amend the Constitution, but it can't destroy its soul. It can't alter those core fundamental features, things like democracy, secularism, the federal structure. It's there to protect the very identity of the Republic. And that brings us right back to today and leaves us with a pretty big question to think about. We have this incredible blueprint designed over 75 years ago for a nation that has transformed in ways its founders could have never imagined. So the question is this blueprint, this vision, still the right one to guide a 21st century India through all the challenges that lie ahead? And that, right there, is the enduring question at the very heart of this amazing living document.